We welcome you back to another edition of Chicago's Legal Latte. Hi, everybody. This is Jim Mitchell, and we're starting off 2025 by welcoming a new guest to our conversations here. One of the partners at Lavelle Law, Jack Lydon, joins us. Jack, first of all, nice to see you. I'm glad you took the time and looking forward to talking to you today.
I'm glad to see you, Jim. Happy to do it.
Thank you. So Jack is involved in a number of different practice groups at the firm. But one of the things that he has spent a lot of time dealing with is election law. And if you are really anywhere in the Chicago area, you read frequently about elections and challenges and people being questioned about their position on the ballot. We're going to talk about all that today and kind of help future candidates a little bit. And Jack, I know, we're familiar with elections at the very highest level, but I would imagine it's these municipal elections and local school boards and things where there are more candidates and more activity. Is that where you spend a lot of your time in terms of the election law, dealing with those smaller elections?
Mostly, yeah. Mostly I deal with local elections, some countywide elections and things like that, but mostly local municipal elections such as, for city council of Chicago, other city councils or boards of trustees around
Exactly.
municipalities, and then also school boards.
Right. So many of those people are certainly not professional politicians. It's not what they do. They do this more out of service. So maybe they're entering knowing what they want to do, but not how to do it. What does someone really need to do to become a candidate for office?
So there's really a couple of things you have to think about in terms of when you're running for office. One is to start a committee. So if you're raising money or spending money, first thing you need to think about is establishing a political committee. Now, there are two kinds of political committees. There's federal and there's state political committees. There's also candidate committees and political party committees, but mostly what we're talking about is candidate committees. So if you're raising and spending money for an anticipated run for office, you need to establish a committee. And then there's the second part, which is getting on the ballot and staying on the ballot. Mostly, for every office, there are requirements in the election code that you have to abide by in order just to get your name printed on the ballot and your votes counted and potentially take office.
So let's go back to the committee. I know, obviously, having known the attorneys at Lavelle Law for many years, you're very involved in helping people form business entities. When it comes to an election committee, are there certain procedures and filings that have to take place that you can guide people through?
Yeah, so it's actually somewhat similar to establishing a corporation or an LLC. You have to file not with Secretary of State, but with the Illinois State Board of Elections. And it doesn't cost any money. You have to file, you have to prepare, fill out, and file. You actually have to deliver it or mail it in, a paper copy signed to the Board of Elections, and they'll give you a number. And it doesn't cost any money to do. You have to pick and identify a chairman of the committee and a treasurer for the committee. You also have to make certain other disclosures, like what your bank is and where you live and what campaign you're associated with.
And without getting too far, because this may be a separate topic, but I assume then, as you mentioned, if you're going to raise and spend money, there are probably some financial obligations that need to be upheld once that committee is formed.
Yeah, so you can raise and spend any amount of money you want. You just have to disclose who your donors are and how you're spending the money. There are some constitutional challenges and to amounts, right? So the state court amounts, I'm sorry, not court, the State Board of Elections puts caps on amounts of individual contributions, and then also contributions by political parties, by labor unions. So those caps, if you're funding your own campaign, which some wealthy candidates do, those caps won't apply either to you or to your opponents in that race. So, but absent that, you have to report or even including that, you have to report your contributions and your expenditures.
So let's switch gears now, because you mentioned one other very important part, which is, well, two-part: getting on the ballot, staying on the ballot. And I know that's where a lot of issues arise for candidates. What are the steps necessary to get, first of all, listed on a ballot?
Okay, so it's basically a two-part step. You have to circulate nominating petitions. So there is a certain statutory form that you use, and you get registered voters within the jurisdiction that you're running for. Say you're running for the city council of the city of Chicago. So you have to, and you come from a particular ward. Say, for instance, the first ward, right? So you would run for alderman for the first ward. You would get a nominating petition that identifies you, it identifies the district, and then you get registered voters from within who live within that first ward to sign the petition. And you have to get a certain number of petitions. The numbers change on occasion. It's usually some percentage of with a maximum, sometimes a maximum, but always a minimum number. And then you have to get the certain number, and then you take those signatures. You also create and sign a statement of candidacy. You bind them up and you take them to the election authority. In the instance of this City Council of Chicago, you take the Illinois, I'm sorry, not the Illinois, the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners, and say, for instance, if you were running in a suburb, say Schaumburg or something, you would then take it to the Schaumburg clerk, who would then accept it. It would see that it is in apparent conformity, that is to say, it has the necessary documents. That entity, that village clerk does not search those signatures, does not otherwise judge the validity of it all. That comes later.
So, and we're talking with Jack Lydon, who is a partner at Lavelle Law, and Jack's sharing some information with us today about election bonds and the things that we'll need to do to enter some of these campaigns and become a candidate. And happy to have him sharing information with us today. And Jack, when you talk about those signatures, I think that's one of the things that most of us are familiar with, where we see the challenges to those signatures. So, first of all, is it really incumbent upon the potential or the candidate to make sure in some way that they're getting enough signatures and that they're hopefully valid? Then how does someone else get a look at those and start a challenge if they think there's something amiss there?
I usually advise people to start this process a year out. The period for circulating nominating petitions is generally the summer, the end of the summer, the fall, preceding whenever the election is.
Okay.
So you start a year out, you form your committee, you get your petitions in order. Usually I advise people to talk to a lawyer before you start circulating, get your petition in the proper form, and then circulate. Now, in terms of circulating, having already talked to an election lawyer, you know that you have to obtain those signatures from people who are registered to vote in that jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
So you get those signatures, but it's a very dynamic process. I don't know if you've actually signed anyone's nominating petitions. It's a dynamic process. You're catching people when they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what you're running for. They don't know where they live. They don't know if they're a registered voter. So, but I always tell people, have them sign it anyway, and we can deal with it after the fact. So I tell candidates, vet those signatures as soon as you get them. There are ways to determine online if someone is registered to vote. You can go to the election authority and view their signature. You can judge for yourself whether they live where they say they live, whether they are a registered voter, and if their signature is appropriate. I always tell people, vet them in advance. If you have them vetted, then you know where you are. Now,
Mhm.
assuming you don't, or assuming that you're pretty careless or that your opponent is pretty careless, immediately after the filing period, usually the filing period is around Thanksgiving. Immediately, and the filing period is 1 week, right? There are very strict deadlines. You file your papers, then the next day, sometimes the same day, they're available online. Or I shouldn't say online. They're available to obtain from the election authority.
Okay.
So the election authority will email you your opponent's nominating petitions, and you can go through them. You can check them yourselves. You can go down to the Board of Elections and see if the people are registered and see if they are whether or not you should challenge that signature. Many times people don't have enough signatures. They don't file enough.
Mhm.
They get many signatures. For instance, in a aldermanic race, it's about 200 or 473 signatures, valid signatures you have to have. Many people file many more than that, but many of those are also invalid. So one has to assume that when you file nominating petitions, somebody else is going to be looking at them, somebody else is going to be judging them. And then if they're not in order, if there's something wrong in the description of the jurisdiction or the office or something, that is also a legal basis to challenge. But if you get a challenge, then you're basically in a little administrative proceeding, a little lawsuit that happens real fast, and it's very difficult for individuals not acquainted with that to
Mhm.
themselves.
And so we've got just a couple minutes left, Jack, but I want you to talk about that process a little bit. And I assume that's perhaps another place where you do some work helping candidates. If there's a challenge, there is that board of comprised of different people in different jurisdictions, I believe. But what does that look like? What do you have to do to go in and secure your spot on the ballot once someone has challenged some of your signatures?
Well, it's really like a little lawsuit.
Mhm.
And so you hire a lawyer and there's due process. There's usually a hearing officer. Sometimes in some jurisdictions, the electoral board itself will sit as the judge and jury in a case, and you have to defend yourself on the spot. Sometimes these hearings happen all at once. You
Mhm.
go through, what they call this going through the signatures is called a record examination. So there's usually a hearing officer that's assigned to go through a record examination, at least in the context of the city of Chicago and Cook County, and in some jurisdictions, some suburban jurisdictions, and even other counties, where you go through a record examination. You go and you literally compare the signatures and see if they're good, and sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Then there's a report, and if there are not enough signatures, the hearing officer will say so, and generally when that happens, um, you certainly have the right to appeal to the electoral board and to the circuit court.
Mm.
Usually that resolves itself if you don't have enough signatures.
All right. Before I let you go, Jack, great summary so far. I know there's a lot more we could talk about, but for potential candidates, what are those one or two things, just whether it's something we covered or something you haven't mentioned, top things they should always be aware of if they really want to be in good standing and get themselves on a ballot?
Well, the first thing I would say is start early.
Yeah.
Make your decision to run well before the time you have to circulate nominating papers. Talk to a lawyer. Get your political committee in order before you raise or spend $5,000. If you don't, the Board of Elections will fine you. They will fine you, and it just hampers your campaign to no end. So get your committee in order, get someone you trust to run it. Then circulate the nominating petitions, talk to a lawyer, get the proper form,
Mhm.
vet those signatures, and make sure that you file them on time in the proper way. And that's a lot of what I do, is making sure that the papers are all correct when they're circulated, that they're put together properly, and that they're filed timely.
Excellent. Jack Lydon, thanks so much for being with us. Great to have a conversation with you. And anyone who wants to follow up, Lavelle Law, 847-705-7555, 847-705-7555. And Jack, I hope we'll talk again soon and have some more conversations on this stuff.
Thank you, Jim. I'm happy to talk to you about it anytime.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right.